Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. Today, we are going to talk about organizational culture, the what, the why, and the strategy on how to improve it. My name is Carly McLennan, and I will be hosting the webinar today and bringing you as much strategy and content as I can as to why this is so important in 2025. All right, give me a moment and let me share my slides. Okay, so here we are going to be talking about organizational culture. So a little bit of how today is going to go. We're going to talk about what organizational culture is. We're going to talk about why being proactive about culture is so important for your employees and the business, what it means to align your company values and culture within teams, departments, and managers. And then last but not least, build a strategy, how to improve and execute a successful company culture for companies of all sizes. So first up, what is organizational culture? Organizational culture is the set of values, beliefs, and practices that define an organization's personality and work environment. It influences how employees, customers, and other stakeholders experience the organization. Culture is, so another, brief description from this one's from Harvard Business Review, but it says culture is consistent, observable patterns of behavior in organizational. Quoting Aristotle, which Aristotle said, we are what we repeatedly do. So if we're quoting Aristotle and talking about culture, we all know culture is not new, right? Like, I think culture has been an HR initiative for as long as most of us can remember, and culture has evolved a lot. However, Gartner did a study and they put out a report, and they said the second priority for HR professionals in 2025 will be organizational culture. That's one of the common challenges in 2025. So yes, culture has been around for as long as we can remember. However, we need to be constantly adapting because more changes have happened in the last 5 years than probably the last 30 years. Remote work, I know we've all talked about this a lot, but it has really played a huge part in what it means for culture to be and what culture can look like. This I thought was really interesting. This was for 2024 data, and it talked about remote work days offered by employers. So if there was 0 days offered of remote work, then they were in office 5 days per week. And so only 32% of the workforce was in office 5 days a week. And then over here in the 5 days per week, meaning they worked remotely 5 days per week. So there's only actually 21% of the workforce that's completely remote. And then we have a smattering of the mix and match of in between. So again, just another reason of why we have to consistently be adapting for our organizational culture. I bring up this definition. We're going to talk a little bit about community because I want community to be a theme throughout this whole presentation. We're going to dive into values, and maybe community is one of your company values. We're going to dive into systems and attitudes and practices, and in the end, strategy. But an overarching theme as we think about organizational culture, I hope we have embedded in us and in this conversation the importance of community. So the Surgeon General of the United States, he was the 19th to 21st Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Halagree-Murthy, and he put out this article as his kind of parting words as he was leaving the position. And he talks a lot about, actually the whole thing is about community. So what makes community possible? 3 core elements: relationships, service, and purpose. And one core virtue, love. Together, they create the ecosystem of making and belonging that are essential for fulfillment. Community is so important, and with so many things happening in our world, how can we build community within our workplaces? Okay, so we talked about what is organizational culture. Now we'll move on to why being proactive about culture is so important for your employees and the business. So Globalization Partners surveyed 8,000 workers, and they came up with it saying employee experience will be vital to build successful global teams. I have some stats coming up for you that are really interesting. So employee loyalty and company culture, okay? Employees would, 58% of employees would switch jobs for better culture. 43% of employees would leave for a 10% pay raise, and we all know how expensive turnover is. And 74% of employees feel demotivated by poor culture fit. So if 74% of employees are demotivated, you are not getting the most out of your employees or their productivity. Financial impact of strong company culture. So you can see 4 times the amount of revenue growth with a strong culture. You can see an increase of 27% in revenue per employee with high talent managers. And 90% of employers believe culture fit is critical. Okay, so we're glad that employers feel that culture fit is critical. And if you need help pitching culture and working on culture as a big strategic initiative in 2025, these are the stats that you should be sharing, right? That revenue growth, the increase in revenue per employee, those are very impactful to anyone worried about the business. The dark side of it, the toxic work environment. So 38% of employees want to quit due to toxic culture. 58% of employees affected by negative office politics. And there's 30% say 30% of employees have left due to workplace conflict. Again, so if we're not intentional about our culture, these are the results that we're going to see. And I'll say it here, and I'll probably say it again throughout the webinar, but if we are not intentional about culture, no matter if you are working on culture right now or not, culture forms regardless. So you might as well be intentional and get ahead of it, or else your business will not be able to survive. There's too much data out there. Employees are thriving amongst great culture and suffering with toxic culture. And so you will not see the business outcomes you need to see with a toxic culture, or if you're not paying crucial and consistent intention and attention to your culture. Okay, so what it means to align your company values and culture within teams. Sorry, give me 1 second. I have something stuck in my throat. Sorry. Okay, thank you. So yes, what it means to align your company values and culture within teams, departments, and managers. Okay, so often I feel like when we think of organizational culture, it can feel a little bit like this. And we're going to watch a fun clip here. So bear with me. Okay, we got the employee and employee engagement.
What do you want? What do you want?
It's not that simple.
What do you want?
Okay, so sometimes employee engagement, we're trying to figure it out. We're trying to move the needle. And it's like, what do these employees want? Love the notebook. Love the clip. But
what do you want?
Okay, there we go. So luckily for you, Motivosity has figured out what employees want. So you don't have to question it anymore. So we did a survey of 2,000 workers, and we found that 72% of respondents say being connected to their company's culture is important to them. Okay? Why are we working on culture? Because it matters to our people and our bottom line. 48% said their coworkers are the ones who make a company's culture special, more so than leadership and shared common values. I thought these stats here were astounding. Now, I'm going to talk about values in this presentation, and this is not to diminish the importance of it, because we're going to talk about how you need to embed your values into your culture, because people are saying culture and being connected to their coworkers is more important than leadership and shared common values. So it brings me back to this community piece, right? If we want to have an overarching theme of community within our culture, then we're going to be on the right track, because, like that previous stat said, being connected to their coworkers matters. And that's what you get in community, right? Relationship, service, and purpose. So some more statistics for you from that same survey. So the survey of 2,000 people that we did, but 63% said having face-to-face communication is the most effective way to build a positive relationship with our coworkers. Now, looking at our remote statistics, this isn't always possible, but we're going to talk about some systems and how we can put that into a place. And how do we think about communication within our culture? Are we thinking about it, right? How can we provide face-to-face opportunities of conversation and communication regardless of our remote or in-office statuses? 58% said having a company commit to employee recognition has a major or significant role in their decision to stay. How is recognition part of our culture? And only 13% aren't influenced by recognition when it comes to deciding if they should stay or leave a company. Some really, really crucial stats here. I have showed this meme in webinars before, but I love it, right? It's like company, all right, what do you need? Employees, they're listing off the things. company, best I can do is pizza. All right, love this meme, but it is 2025 and we have to be able to do better than pizza. So that brings us to our next section of what does organizational culture include? Values, systems, attitudes, and practices. And we're going to go through each one of these. Okay, so company values, core principles or beliefs that guide an organization's decision making, and behavior. Okay, so I want to share a story, and this is my CEO, Scott Johnson, and he gave a presentation at an HR conference, and there's a part of it that really stuck with me. And that part was, he said, he's talking about company values, and he said, your values should hurt. And what he meant by that and went on to explain is that, say you have a company value that is community, and your executive team says, yep, our company value is a community, but they will not provide budget for company activities. That doesn't line up, right? So sometimes we have to make sacrifices to get the culture we want or to live by our values. Here at Motivosity, we know that sometimes we have to take away time from being productive and getting our actual jobs done so that we can have time to connect with our coworkers and do fun activities. We sacrifice a little bit of productivity to live by our values. And in the long run, if you do live by your values and connect those and embed those in your culture, I promise your company will be more productive. But sometimes at first, it's going to feel like sacrifice. And it should if you're truly living your company values. So values are a way to bring your people together no matter where they are. 20%, so only 20% of employees strongly agree that they are committed to their organization's cultural values. Not a great statistics, right? How do we help people be committed to our values? How do we bring them into our values and a part of our culture? Let's see here. So less than 1 in 4 employees say they understand the values that drive the culture. Okay, so if people can't feel connected to the values if they don't even understand them or if they don't even see them as part of the culture. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And for some inspiration, I have a fun little clip.
Gentlemen, there's been a lot of talk about expectation lately. Expectation of what we should be able to do when people are expecting. People are expecting quite a bit. I see us winning out there tonight. I have no trouble seeing that. That is not what I'm expecting. I expect you boys to go out there and not take this team lightly because I promise you, they're going to come at you with everything they've got. I expect you boys to execute. Yes, sir. Expect you boys to play football. Yes, sir. We are eyes full, hearts can't lose.
Gosh, okay, I love that clip. That is from Friday Night Lights. I have chills. But talk about a team or a group of people that know their values, know their expectations. Hey, clear eyes, full hearts, can't lose. They're going to live those values. Sorry, there we go. Okay. So this is really cool, and it's from Gartner as well, but it talks about the employee impact of activating culture via cultural embeddedness. So this we're going to talk about is like how you can embed your culture into every part of the ecosystem that is your organization. How do we embed our values into every part of our culture, into all of our systems? So really, we want to think about culture as this overarching umbrella, and it is part of every part of our company, whether we are intentional or not. It is part of our company. Okay, so HR, you already have enough to do, or whatever professional or whatever industry you're working in right now, you already have enough to do. So with this, when we're thinking about culture, our theme number 1 was community, and our second theme of the day is going to be work smarter, not harder. Again, work smarter, not harder. How do you incorporate values into things you are already doing? Your recognition programs, your wellness programs, your highlights in company newsletters. How can you do a value of the month, right? Pick a company value and how do you incorporate it into an activity that month? If you have recognition, and I hope you do, how do you give value-based thanks? How do your values shape your recognition or embed into your recognition program that you're already running? So this was interesting because we're going to talk about tying recognition to company values, and these are all the great results you can see, right? So these are the businesses that top company values at businesses with high ENPS scores, and you can use recognition to embed these values into your culture. And I said I hope you're running recognition. And whatever recognition system you are using or program or software, I hope it does incorporate the values. And if it doesn't, let's talk to Motivosity, because we can incorporate your values into your recognition. But this was a recognition given the other day, and I thought it was awesome. And here is one of our serve always values being portrayed in real time. So yes, we put out public recognition and they get to say thanks and someone gets to receive thanks, but we get to see what value it's around. And then this bottom chart actually shows all of Motivosity's. This is our internal Motivosity. All the appreciation sent and using what values. So the end of the year, if you want to know what values are being lived, if you want to know how your values are being portrayed in your culture, this is the data you need. Again, you're probably already doing something with recognition. So how can you embed your values into recognition to make sure that your values are embedded within your culture and your company as a whole? All right. Again, we got to put your money where your mouth is when it comes to living at your values. And so what things are you already doing? Are you already doing awards at your company? Great. How can you do awards around your values? If you had a value around community, we have a not squash award here at Motivosity. And what this means is that, whether you're introverted or extroverted, right? You're trying to connect with your peers. You're trying to be part of the culture. So if you go to lunch with more than 2 people, you take a picture, submit it, and you get this award and you get an extra $5. Again, we're willing to pay to help people be in part of the culture, to live our values. If you have an always learning value, can you do a book club, right? Like, how can you start to embed these things within? Are you running a wellness program? And think about your values. Do your values say that, hey, maybe you should be running a wellness program? Or if you already are running a wellness program, great job. How do you embed values throughout that program and that initiative that you have? If you need some help, we can share this white paper. It's awesome on how to run the wellness program. And we can also talk about how to incorporate values there more specifically. So how are your systems affecting your culture? Again, we kind of broke organizational culture down into the 4 things: values, systems, attitudes, practices. So we talked about the values. Now I'm going to move on to systems. How are your systems affecting your culture? You have to be proactive and intentional about your systems if you want it to positively impact your culture. Again, whether you're intentional or not, culture is going to happen. So, if you're going to be intentional about it, or if you are a growing company right now, you have to be meticulous about your systems to be able to maintain your culture through that growth. Maybe your company's going through a transition. You need to be meticulous about your systems and thinking about how they affect your culture and vice versa to make sure that you can get the culture you want. Again, back to our theme number 2, work smarter, not harder. So when we think about our systems and our culture, how do they interact? So here, right, like, let's ideate right now. Here are some simple ideas that you can have. How to input your values and your culture into your system. So your hiring systems. Do you portray culture honestly when you're interviewing? And that goes both ways, right? Are they going to be a good culture fit both ways? When you call their references to ask about culture, when you call their references, are you asking about culture fit in the past? How can you embed questions like that as part of your hiring process and your hiring system? What's your system for promotions? Do you use or could you use an anonymous team survey for how they fit into the culture? Are they a team player? I'm going to talk about this at the end about the disconnect effect, but sometimes there is a disconnect between what a manager is seeing, what the rest of the team is seeing. And so how can you, as part of your systems, your promotion system, make sure that you are maintaining a great positive culture? When you think about the systems around your company policy, your team and organizational activities, how does that affect your culture, right? Maybe you're already doing activities, but how can we be a little bit more strategic to embed our culture into those activities? Meetings and one-on-ones, how do those affect your culture? And how are you being intentional about the systems? What things can you put in place? Maybe if you're not having one-on-ones, that's a system you can put in place. Start having one-on-ones. They do amazing things for employee engagement and company and business results. But that's a system, right? Like how your meetings work. Can you start a cultural movement that at the beginning of every meeting, you share a picture? So that's what we do here at Motivosity. Our weekly Motivosity meeting, we all share a picture from our weekends. And it takes 5 to 10 minutes, but we all get to bring the human aspect into work. We get to be connected to our coworkers. And I guarantee that makes us more productive. And that's also how our culture is shaped, right? Now we are a more human-centered workplace. Our team is a connected and community-built team. Okay, when I think about all the different things that HR is in charge of, and these things you're in charge of, and they're going out into the rest of the business, how do you incorporate your culture into each of these systems? When you think about the layout in your org chart, how is your culture being portrayed at every organization? If you're an HR business partner, right? Maybe you work with marketing or operations or finance. How do you, as an HR business partner, make sure that your culture is embedded into every system in each department and management team? So this is kind of more the strategy part. It's like, how do we make sure that we are intentional about every system and that they are aiding and enabling and producing a more positive culture? So our third theme of the day is, with culture, everything comes full circle. So next we're going to talk about attitudes and practices. And these are actually the result of the values and systems being put into place. So that's how everything is coming full circle. So how do our systems influence our attitudes and practices? Well, let's go through some small ideas that can make a big impact. Reinforce behaviors that fit your desired culture. Again, let's think about public recognition and with those values that are tied to it, right? If someone does something great and that's really like core to our culture, I want to be able to send an appreciation and show up on the public social feed and everyone be able to see it. Let's highlight and praise those good initiatives and behaviors and work ethic that promotes and ties into our culture. What awards are you doing within your team, departments, or company-wide that affect your culture? Set aside budget for team activities. There are so many team activities you can do that have little to no budget, but make sure it's a thought. Make sure you're thinking about team activities. I know for my team, we go on walks. Now, right now it's cold, so those have gotten a lot harder, but instead of having a little team meeting, we'll say like, hey, let's just go for a 15-minute walk. And sometimes we talk about work and sometimes we talk about life. But those are a free team activity that anyone could do. Fun Lunch Friday, okay? Small idea that can make a big impact. This is an idea I had at Motivosity where I realized like, hey, Fridays, why don't we just try to get as many people together, right? So often sales is going for lunch and this team's going for lunch and product's going for lunch. But on Fun Lunch Friday, we do our best to gather as many people as we can from different teams and go out for a little bit longer of a lunch and enjoy that Friday. And when you launch these little initiatives, it is so fun to see how they start to embed within our culture. Again, everyone pays for their own lunch. It's totally opt-in, but it starts to become a part of our culture. Remote teams. I shared that story about starting with a weekend picture that we do. That's a great way to build human connection when you're remote, which is even harder to do sometimes. Move the snacks. All right. So is your office split into different teams and departments? Can you move the snacks so that different teams have to go to another part of the office and interact? And again, maybe they're just going for a snack and all they do is say hi to the customer success department. But those things start to affect your culture. Those are attitudes and practices that affect your culture. And if you're intentional about them, they impact your culture in a positive way. Can you have a culture treasure hunt, right? What can you do to hide your company values around within your product or within your workplace? And how can you embed that into your culture? I talked about one-on-ones before, but I'm gonna say it again because I'm such a believer. Have one-on-ones with managers to help train and ideate on best culture practices. So often, one-on-ones happen between the manager and the direct reports. But as an HR leader, how can you have one-on-ones with each manager to, again, help train and ideate? So include them in the culture practice. We're going to talk about this a little bit later as well. But can you do a luncheon, learn with your managers so that they know what's expected, so that they can live and breathe the company values and portray that to their team, and also help get them bought in, right? The best way to launch any initiative is through your managers. So if you're launching an initiative around organizational culture in 2025, which I hope you are, get your managers involved. And again, we'll continue to talk about that because it is very important to our strategy. All right. Last but not least, how to improve and execute a successful company culture for companies of all sizes. Here's where we talk about the strategy. And before I get there, I want to talk about the disconnect effect. So this was from a report put out by the Arbinger Institute. And essentially what it's saying is that executives often focus on these strategic goals and see employee professional development as a path to improving performance and achieving long-term objectives. From their vantage point, professional skills could directly impact innovation, competitiveness, and the ability of evolving business demands. On the other hand, managers and individual contributors are closer to daily operations and may feel that morale and engagement are more immediate and pressing issues. They experience firsthand how low morale or disengagement can lower productivity, reduce collaboration, and increase turnover, which affects performance in the short term and compliance skill development efforts. Okay, so sometimes, again, there can be this disconnect between executives and what's actually happening on the frontline employees or within teams. And so I did provide some statistics so you can help get your executive team on board for our culture initiatives. But the disconnect, I think this just paints a bigger picture of the disconnect effect between what executives see and what employees see. And executives don't always see the impact of poor morale. But I'm going to go through a few things and how that bleeds into it. So how do we combat the disconnect effect, right? Like, how do we bridge the gap between what our firsthand employees are seeing versus what our executive team is seeing? And that's not even only on the importance of culture. It's what our culture is. Maybe your CEO thinks that the culture is amazing and the values are being lived and that everyone is engaged. And your firsthand employees, when you go into the break room and you hear everyone talking, you know that that's a different story. So how do we combat the disconnect effect? In our strategy, actually, no, I'm not going to get there yet. But first, I'm going to tell a story. And because I had a friend tell me about a situation at their workplace where they had decided that promotions weren't really like being talked about, or they'd kind of said like, hey, we're not doing promotions right now. However, a couple months later, there was one promotion that happened. And to the executive team, this was a great, smart person that got promoted. To the rest of the company, this was a really toxic employee. And so what kind of message does that send? And again, this is just an example of the disconnect effect. And leaders play a huge role in culture. So how do we combat that disconnect effect? Well, before I get to that, here's some few stats. The role of leaders in shaping culture. So 76% of employees say managers set the tone for culture. That's why one-on-ones are so important and involving your managers are so important. 42% of employees feel leaders don't contribute positively. And 66% of employees report positive culture due to leadership. Okay, so if you do have a positive culture, it's often leadership has a big impact. And if you don't, it can go the opposite way as well. So how do we combat this disconnect effect? Start with surveys. Okay, when you think about your to-dos on your organizational culture and your strategy around your organizational culture, you need to start with surveys. And this is how we can make sure that our executive team and our frontline employees are in line and they're both looking through the same looking glass. So what the executive team sees versus what the employees see. Start with a survey. And I will have a resource at the end here where we talk about, actually it might be coming up, about 6 employee engagement questions that you can ask to get a pulse on your survey and your everyday life and employee engagement throughout the company. And don't just do one survey, keep them going. So that brings me back to this community aspect, because I do hope as we think about our values, our systems, our attitudes, and our practices, and we think about our strategy of or shaping our strategy of organizational culture, we think of community, the relationships, the service, the purpose, the love within our company and our coworkers. How do we create the ecosystem of meaning and belonging that are essential for fulfillment? Okay, so if I were to wrap this up, and if you really needed a to-do list for your organizational culture, this is what I would give you. Again, over here on the right, you're going to see the QR code. And I just talked about a survey and how important that is to start off your strategy. And it's the first thing on my to-do list. If you need help with that survey, here's 6 questions that Motivosity puts out. And they are a great way to gauge the employee's sentiment. So you can just open up your phone, open up the camera, and then go over that QR code and you can click that link to it. So organizational culture to-do list. Start with the survey. This can help inform the executive team of what actually needs to happen, what's actually going on. Then define what you want your culture to be and set benchmarks within your chosen survey question. So again, what do you want your culture to be? What are your values here? How do you want your culture to contribute to your organization? And then set benchmarks for what success looks like. And this does need to be aligned with the executive team so we can make sure that it has a greater impact. And if you don't have company values, create them. If you do have company values, incorporate them better. So again, look at all of your systems and how are your values and your culture being embedded into that. Create a game plan. So it has some foreshadowing there, but look at the systems and softwares you are currently using and working on. Ideate on how you can implement small changes to make big impacts. Again, you don't always need huge budget line items to have a great impact on your culture. What are the little things you are doing? How are you incorporating, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but how are you incorporating your values into each system to help improve your culture? How are you thinking about culture within every system of every organization and team within your company? Explore what new structures you will put in place. And then research options that fit your company, right? So structures and systems, maybe it's Fun Lunch Friday, maybe it's sharing a picture, maybe it's a way bigger impact. What kind of structure can you outline? What is a one-on-one game plan you have for your company? And then define a budget, okay? Again, if you are not putting any work or effort or money behind your culture, it's probably not going to turn out very great. So define a budget, get your managers on board. That's so important. Involve them in this process and in this to-do list as well. Be diligent and then continue to survey to track progress, okay? This survey cannot just happen once. You need to know that your efforts and the systems that you're putting into place are working. You do that with your surveys and you watch your ENPS score rise. But more importantly, I want to get to organizational culture strategy. Okay, yes, you can have your to-do list, but when you're thinking about your to-do list and you're defining your budgets and you're defining your company values, think about the strategy. So define what you want your culture to be. Your values are the foundation of your culture. This has to be the foundation, the roots of your culture. As part of your strategy and in your to-do list, include managers early to increase buy-in. Show your managers these survey results. When you're thinking about your company values, ask the managers. When you're thinking about ideas or you want to brainstorm ideas to improve your culture, bring your managers in, have them brainstorm. And every initiative that you're pushing out, if your managers are part of organizing it and coming up with it, they're going to be a lot more helpful later to distribute it to their teams and live those values as well. And then last but not least, work smarter, not harder, okay? You are already doing so many great things. So just before you launch your next initiative, before you have your next meeting about your wellness program, take a step back and think about how does your culture get affected by this wellness program? How can I add my values into this wellness program? Next time you have a budget meeting, right? And you were like, think about how is this meeting going to affect our culture? How are the systems and the outcomes of this budget going to affect our culture? And then everything comes full circle. And this is kind of with a star at the bottom, okay? There are no rogue dollars. There are no one-off initiatives where you don't think about culture or you don't think that they impact culture. Every company activity, every policy and system that has a thought behind it of how it can help build and contribute to the vision of your culture. Okay, I'm going to say that again. There are no rogue dollars. There are no one-off initiatives. Every company activity, every policy and system has a thought behind it of how it can help build and contribute to the vision of the culture. No team is doing anything. No dollar is spent without a thought of, hey, is this going to positively impact our culture? Okay, you do not get to go off and the finance team doesn't get to launch an initiative. The product does not get to launch a project if it is going to negatively impact our culture. We have to be meticulous about our systems and our values to save and keep or contribute to and create a more positive culture. Okay, so thank you so much for joining me today. If you missed those resources that I shared, you need the NPS questions. Here's that QR code. Give you a second there. And then if you want to check out a Motivosity video of what we do, especially from the HR professional side, check out this video. It's entertaining, awesome, all the things. And we cannot say enough things about how Motivosity will help change your culture for the better. It is something that you can do intentionally without having to put in a lot of work. So let Motivosity be the foundation and the strategy and the structure to creating a more positive culture. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.